So, hi, everybody. I think we are now live. This Kairos moment, life has begun. This Kairos moment, you are the one. Right beside you is where I belong. From this Kairos on. So I think you can hear me. If you can hear me okay, please give me a um, thumbs up in the chat or some sort of indicator in the chat to let me know that you're hearing me coming through loud and clear. So welcome everybody. I said after the first one that I'd consider doing these live. I think if it's at a good day and time where I can do it live with an extended period of time where I can give people an opportunity to come on by the end. I think I do wanna do it live because I think it'll be useful to have, some commentary and some back and forth regarding this stuff. Um, but yeah, I think it's gonna come down to whatever I can do. So please, bear with me. And especially in these as the whole United States is getting swept up by cold and winter weather, even down here in New Orleans, we're getting hit with it over the next, day or so. Um, I figured, it made sense to maybe, I'll just sing a tiny little bit of a hymn, so in the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. It's a really, lovely song. I don't know if it's Protestant or Catholic, but we sang that. It's kind of forlorn, and I feel like we are at a forlorn time. But as I talked about in the previous one, when you're down, going straight into it, actually mourning and, being willing to experience the mourning, I think helps immensely. I think a lot of people don't think that's true, but I do think that's true. And I think that is the time that we're in. I got my Grim Grizz mug here. Um, I have pointing anxiety. But I also have a great agenda. I can't read it because it's mirror image, but obviously I could look at it and read it. Um, okay, where did I want to begin with this particular live stream? You guys can hear me okay? Anglican, Christina Rossetti, Anglican poet. Oh, thank you, Anselman. Appreciate that. Yeah. Um, so I thought I would start this episode by I had a funny image come to my mind, but it's the moment in time when you realize you're naked. And it's like when Adam and Eve realized that they're naked in the garden. I think the time that we're coming into is going to be this time when a lot of people realize that they're naked in the wilderness. I think a better way of construing it is wilderness as opposed to garden. Maybe it really is naked in the garden though, because they're going to still have electricity and heat and like an ideal, let's say, physical environment, right? We don't have to worry about the predators. We don't have to worry about freezing to death or not getting enough food to eat. But what I mean by naked is like the cultural clothes that we've been wearing. Um, if they reach the point of no longer being sufficient to keep one, I mean, what's the purpose of clothes? Like, it's really vulnerability as I see it. It's if we're feeling vulnerable, if we're too hot or sorry, too cold actually, or if there's predators or from the other sex, that being said, that's the other danger. And it also clothes represent a role. Clothes represent who you are in the world. Are you a police officer? Are you a firefighter? Are you a nurse? Are you a caregiver? Are you a priest? That's what clothes represent. And this whenever in the Bible there's talk of clothes or being naked or something like that, that's what that usually means is a stripping of who you thought you were before. So there's this very weird line in the book of Mark, and the speculation is that the writer of Mark was this person, and that's why it's only in Mark. And Mark is the shortest gospel, so it's a very strange thing. But the line is like, he ran like the soldiers tried seizing this boy in the garden, and they just grabbed his clothes, and then he ran out of the garden, and so he like ran out of the garden totally naked. And it's this very weird line in the book of Mark. Someone can look it up and put it in the comments. Um, and but when I read that, like, what that means to me is just it's the equivalent of seeing yourself fully, exposed, like, whoever you thought you were in terms of the things that you cared about, what your heart is exposed, like, "Oh, this is who I was, and now I'm completely naked because I don't have a who I am now, because the who I was, I realize is just tattered clothing on the ground, and it's gone. And that's what a culture does. That's what institutions do. They provide us that infrastructure of like, this is who we are. Like we're in a family and we're in this and we're doing this and like we have a job and we have this and we have that. And it's like that's the whole that's where the identity question comes in because if you look at all these things, like you look at a career and you look at like a family, and if you look at all these things as an adolescent, and you say like, I don't want any of these things, then you got to go looking for a new identity. And the reasons that you would say I don't want any of these things are innumerable, and that's really the deconstruction that I want to kind of think through is like, as we're giving up the things that we thought were valuable before, a why are we no longer finding those same things valuable? And then b, like, what are the new clothes, like what are how do we even begin to acquire the new clothes? And I think it has to come from God. It can only come from above. It can only come from, and really coming from above means like the humbling. It means that we ourselves need to lower. Like we can't climb up to God. That's not how it works. We don't build the Tower of Babel. The way that, ironically, the lower we go voluntarily, the easier it is for God to come down. That's been my only experience. So like there's this moment in the movie Wall Street. I don't have the clip ready. I actually could have thought of this earlier, um, but like Bud Fox, the protagonist of the movie Wall Street, I think it's 1988. The movie's 88. I think it takes place in like 85. But anyway, like he's got the beautiful girlfriend, and he's got like the penthouse apartment, and he's being successful, and there's this postmodern music playing in the background, and he goes out onto his New York City balcony, and he's like, "Who am I?" That's the nakedness in the wilderness, because like he's in the garden. I mean, he's in New York City, he's in the penthouse, and he's like, I don't know who I am, like Nicodemus talking to Jesus. That was what PBK's sermon was just about. Like, is Nicodemus a follower of Christ, or is he like a prestigious member of the Pharisees? Um, yeah. So that's what I mean by deconstruction. It's all these roles, it's all these identities and parts that are either coming apart or are not as significant or valuable as we once thought they were. And that's what I mean by, I think a lot of people will find themselves naked in the wilderness. The last thing I want to say is like, I think the reason why I want to talk about this now is because I feel the collective feeling at a collective level, that sort of despair and mourning. I felt that personally like 7 or 8 years ago, and I don't. The collective feeling has not permeated into me. Like it's not like I have my moments where I'm kind of down, but in general, I am much more upbeat, much more optimistic for a variety of reasons. And I think the number one reason is because the clothes that I wear, this is a new shirt actually, even though it's an all black shirt. All I wear are these all black shirts. It's like a running joke in my family. Um, but the clothes that I wear are very different today in terms of how I think about my identity today than they were 12 years ago or 10 years ago um, before I deconstructed my deconstruction. And I think it's going to take longer for our entire culture, obviously, because it's just a much bigger thing. You can't turn the ship as quickly. You can't transform the ship nearly as rapidly as a person, but it can happen, and not only that, I think it will happen because I trust in the one above that will give us our new identities. So um, anyway, so when I was at my lowest point 7 years ago, I had this mantra that I would say whenever I was down, and I would repeat this mantra in my head, and it was almost like a prayer. I did the Jesus prayer a lot, but I actually did this mantra more, and that mantra was, "It's going to get worse before it gets better." I I'll say that again. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And on one hand, like the I think the typical person would look at that and say like, "What the heck kind of mantra is that?" Because like you're saying it's going to get and yeah. Um but I wasn't wrong about that mantra, because even if it did get worse and it did get worse as I was, over the course of saying that. And on bad days, it would get worse on those bad days. But also that mantra is going to get worse before it gets better. It implied that there would be a better. There was a better, and there will be a better. And it's like saying we could have the better without going through the challenge, without going through suffering. And I don't buy that. That's not been the experience in my own life, and I don't think that's the experience in anybody else's life. I really think you only get to the promised land after going through a desert. That's the only way it happens. That's the way the game is set up. We can hash it out with God afterwards why he set it up that way. I have my suspicions why he set it up that way. But that's the way it is. That's the way it's set up. Um, and I believe that same phenomenon applies to the culture that it does to an individual. Um, and that simple fact that there will be a better. And I think sometimes you can only get there from faith. But in my experience, that simple fact, like that simple belief, and I do say fact because I genuinely believed it. And Jordan Peterson was in no small part a player in that. But the that fact that there will be a better can be very comforting, and it can give you the fortitude to pass through when it does get worse. So it's like in effect saying that mantra is like putting on the armor of faith. It's like saying, "Yep, I'm ready. I know it's going to be rough, but I'm ready. Let's go. Let's see. Let's see how bad it gets." Um, so yeah, that's what I wanted to start with today before we get into the deconstruction. And I do want to stop this before I think it's like 3:15 my time. I'm on Central Time. So I think it's before 3:15 my time that Sherry and Jeremy Firth are doing their live stream, or maybe it's just Sherry, but it's on Sherry's new channel, and I forget the name of that channel off the top of my head. But if someone wants to put it in the comments, I will pull it up. So that's happening in like I think less than an hour and a half. So I don't want to go more than an hour and a half. Yeah. Mm. Okay. So we left off. Let me go back to let me pull this up. Yeah, so this was a series that came out in 2009 that I had watched, after I had already deconstructed. I considered myself agnostic at this point. I was kinda interested in faith as a broad concept, but, like, I wasn't I wasn't deeply interested in it. I just thought the fine-tuned universe argument was a very strong argument. Like, everything seemed a little bit too perfect for us to just be a random blip that, in existence. It did seem deliberate, and, but I just wasn't convinced that, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was the one true God. That seemed, yeah. And anyway, so I was watching this at that time to basically confirm or justify things I already believed, but I didn't really have a strong scholastic biblical basis for believing the things I believed at that time. And this series gave me a much stronger, oh, see, the biblical scholarship gives me plenty of reason not to be a Christian. Now I can live the way I want with my own clothes, my precious, my way. My way, talking about my way. All right. Um, let me just make sure that well, Yeah, I wanna go back to that for a moment. That's really interesting. It's like we have this illusion that there's, like, one final blow for deconstructing our faith, and, "Oh, it's corn cob, you can't hear it? Oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. Let me stop sharing, and I'm going to stop screen. Let's try it again. So share screen. Could you hear it? Let me see. Deconversion. Also share tab audio. Hold on. We're gonna watch one more time. I apologize to people. Can't hear the video audio. Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. We're gonna play it one more time.
As atheists, we sometimes treat the concept of God as if it has a silver bullet, as if there's just one problem with the idea of God that we can point out that will destroy it altogether as a valid concept. Even atheists who are former and deconverted Christians make this mistake, because there is often one concept about God that dealt the final blow to their belief and brought them to disbelief. But this is probably actually an illusion, and they've probably just forgotten the earlier concepts. So, you may be
Yeah. Now I got a corn cob. Let's see. Wait, no, 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 don't want that. How about this? Yes, that's good. Okay, can you y'all can hear me still? Good. Um, yeah, this is really interesting, this point, because we often think about within the corner, within the TLC, we think about like how do people reconstruct, how do they come back into faith, and they have multiple steps along the way. And I have my own story and narrative about how I tell that story, how I came back to faith, or the things that I find meaningful. But it's interesting because I have this particular event. I have this, like I have an inciting event that brings me down, and then I have, like, the event that pierces the veil, and I see, like, a little bit of light where I see, like, the possibility of faith, and that event is remarkable, and then the event that, like, that really shattered me, that brought me to my knees was my brother passing away, my older brother, and just having Cain echoing in my head, like, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And knowing that I could have reached out to him, I could have, and just thinking at the time that, like, I had my own problems, I had my own issues. He's 10 years older than me. I barely even saw him because he was my half brother, and I only saw him every other weekend, and it wasn't my problem. And, like, all of that edifice of the excuses of, uh, not doing what I should have been doing came crashing down. So that was like the deconstruction of my deconstruction. It was insufficient. My physical materialism was insufficient to protect my heart from being absolutely broken. And at the lowest point I had been up in my life up until that point. Um, yeah. And then And then but that lowering of me and that, like, nakedness of me in that moment, that, like, who I am was totally insufficient. That is what allowed just, like, the tiniest piercing. But the thing is, like, the 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 event, the transcendent event, the God experience, the Holy Spirit experience, which some people have, a lot of people don't have that. The question is, would I still have come to faith without that experience? And I don't know the answer to that question. Like, is it the crescendo that matters in a song, or is it, like, everything that builds up to the crescendo that matters? And I suspect it's more so the buildup. If we, by the grace of God, get that, like, clear ringing, like, that clear but Jesus has this other line where he says, "Blessed are those who believe without seeing." And I think to myself, like, okay, because I was given the gift of this, like, little experience, and most people are not, that means that means what's on me is probably a lot heavier, quite frankly, because it took more for me to see. So I actually chose Doubting Thomas as my saint, and Doubting Thomas really resonated with me a lot and still does. Um, yeah, but I think also in the deconstruction, this is what this gentleman is doing. Like, in the deconstruction of people out of their faith, often they credit like one thing, like they had a pastor who behaved badly and that broke it. But usually it's this whole, and this is why this series that he does is so brilliant. Like this series, he kind of goes through step by step, like all the different, um, I don't know what how to, it's like a lattice of faith, like all the different supporting, um, uh, Charles Murray talks about like a chair of all the things that support a person's life, or a stool. You're sitting on a stool, and those things that support a person's life are, you have your job, you have employment, and that's supporting. You have family or marriage, and that's supporting. That's like an anchoring, supporting of like who you are, your identity. You have small group community, you have friends and family, and that's anchoring and that's supporting. You have children. Children are also anchoring and supporting because you have a purpose, because you have children and you got to take care of them. um and then of course religion is one of those. And but I think that also applies in religion more generally. It's like, what are the supporting pillars that support your faith? And often those things are unconscious. You don't really understand all the aspects that are supporting who you are and what you believe and why. You don't really understand those things until much later, and even then it's an incomplete picture. I'm not saying I fully understood, like I'm not saying I understand my faith completely now. I think I have a much better perspective on it than when I was going through it like I was gonna say 6, 7, no, 7 or 8 years ago. Um, or I think I have a much better perspective on my deconstruction as a kid. But the older I get, the further away I get from the deconstruction. That becomes hard. So you can only see these things. You can only see God after he passes by, only after the passage of time. You can never really see it in the moment as these things are happening. And so that's why I think it's useful to periodically go back and navel gaze at your deconstruction. So let's keep going.
We just forgotten the earlier concepts. So, you may be surprised to hear that I hope to give the concept of God the respect it deserves. I learned a long time ago that you'll never cause someone to see your perspective unless you show them that you understand their perspective. And I want to give the concept of God its fullest and most respectful treatment before showing why I stopped believing it. In the mind of any sophisticated believer, the concept of God is a mega belief. It's a belief that's held together by many small beliefs, many small experiences.
Yeah, so his concept of a mega belief, that would be something like, oh, what's the word? An egregore, maybe? Like a, or Jung would call it like a complex, almost like an archetype within a person. But I think a complex is better because complex is personal, whereas an archetype is transpersonal. So within faith, there is a transpersonal aspect to it. What I mean by that is like everyone goes to the same church, the same service, etc. That's the transpersonal. But then there's a personal in terms of how the individual relates to the thing, relates to the service, relates to the Eucharist, relates to the music. Even if everyone's experiencing objectively like the same music in the room, the way we relate to that, depending on what's going on in our life, depending on a billion different things, is completely different. Yeah, let's keep going here.
That accumulate and form a larger belief. If at any one time one of these beliefs is attacked, a believer can still, in their own mind, rely on the strength of the other beliefs. It's only when a sufficient number of these beliefs that form the mega belief are countered that a Christian will really start to question their faith.
And this is actually network theory. This is how sophisticated network attacks, for instance, need to take into consideration this because let's say if Amazon Web Services experiences a denial of service attack, which is like we try to swarm a given server to shut down a website or something, they can distribute that particular website or service across multiple. And so like the immigration stuff, for instance, like if let's say every single city was doing something at the same time to stop immigration, and then but if it's just like one node in the network, it doesn't seem likely that ICE is thwarted, for instance.
This is called graceful degradation. It's a concept in network theory where multiple nodes in a network can be knocked down, but the network as a whole can still stand up. For the purpose of continuing my story, I'll label these nodes. This is a simplified model of the concept of God, but I think that it covers a sufficient number of different subjects to
He's got a personal relationship on there, but he doesn't talk about, the biggest weakness of this series is the person and the life of Jesus Christ. That's the biggest weakness of this series. Yeah, so that's something I noticed about the new atheists, generally speaking. They attack the Bible. They do not really go after Jesus. And this guy, fell into that same trap. And then so where I was able to pierce that veil is by starting with Jesus, the rock that they were unable to dislodge, so to speak. And then I worked my way backward from Jesus into the Old Testament. And when I did that, when I instead of starting from the Old Testament and getting to Jesus, when I started with Christ and then I work backwards, it's like game changing. But here we go.
make my deconversion convincing. Here's a brief overview of each of these nodes. I may not cover all of them. The first is logical arguments. These arguments could have been presented by someone whom the believer perceives as a reputable authority. I myself was convinced by the arguments of Gerald Schroeder, who wrote The Science of God. Next is prayer. Prayer provides a basis for belief in God through the perception of answered prayer. Next is morality. God is seen as the source of morality.
Yeah, you see the morality one, when this came out in 2009, I think the prevailing wisdom, this is a big one because I think the prevailing wisdom in 2009, and I had this thought too, was that like it was kind of like the end of history, Fukuyama. I've never even read it, but I know it's well understood that like we've reached secular materialism now. Like we have science, technology. We understand democracy is the way to go. We understand that people in a democratic, pluralist society will just be good people naturally, and we understand that what it means to be good people now is just treat others as we would want to be treated, and we don't actually need like Jesus or the Bible to justify and support the way we treat other people now, because it's just automatically obvious. It's assumed. And so yeah, just in the last like 10 years or so, I would say the moral aspect of that, like the assumed morality, has just gone out the window as we see that we can no longer really communicate effectively on what's moral and what's not between political sides. And this is not just the United States. It's almost like every country around the world that's not a totalitarian dictatorship. Um, that common language of like the moral language is no longer there because you don't have the common framework or the common religion or the common person of Jesus to say like, well, what WWJD, if so the people who are not practicing can no longer do the WWJD thing. So yeah, let's keep going.
For Christians. Without God, there can be no morals. Next, there is the beauty of creation, whether the universe or life itself. The complexity of our material reality is a testament to God in the eyes of Christians. Next is the Bible. The Bible is seen as the divine word of God, inspired by God. It's seen to have inherent wisdom. Next is the testimony of other Christians. Other Christians bolster our belief, both by providing an example and by providing numbers. This is also related to our own experience as Christians. We don't see how anyone could believe the way that we believe, with the passion and devotion and commitment that we believe, and become a non Christian? It seems impossible. Finally, and most importantly for me, was my personal relationship with God and my personal experiences of
You know, this is a difference in Catholicism specifically now compared to, let's say 50 years ago. Because I have a lot of older people in my church that they talk about the personal relationship aspect, personal relationship with Jesus Christ was not something that was emphasized in Catholicism. And honestly, I think that might be the single strongest aspect of evangelicalism. And this gentleman grew up in an evangelical tradition. And now that personal relationship aspect has made its way into Catholicism. It's very strong. And yeah, it was essential for me as well. And yeah, it makes sense that it's the last piece of the puzzle for him to deconstruct because it does require some others in order to stand up. You know, God needs to be instantiated in earth, can't just be all spirit. This is why we're not Gnostics.
God. How can you come to not believe in God after feeling that you have communicated with God Himself? Atheists on YouTube have covered almost all of these points individually. I'm going to show you now how all of them come together to affect the single coherent concept of God in a single person's life.
One thing that's noticeably absent that you'll see here. Actually, let me keep it big so that you can see it. Um, One thing that's noticeably absent is the institution of the church. So he's got other Christians there, but that's usually this like um, disassembled network of people that you come in contact with, which back then was through the church, but now it's like it's all over the place because of social media, because of other things. Um, but that's really interesting that he doesn't have a I suspect one of the reasons he deconstructed, and I don't quite frankly, I don't remember all of this, but like I suspect that his interests, and this is much my problem too, is like my interests are very different from the typical person that's in my church. You know, like I enjoy thinking about theological concepts, but I enjoy thinking about them somewhat pragmatically. There are way bigger theological nerds in TLC than me. I'm probably on the lower end of like theological nerddom, but I enjoy it a little bit. But I really like cultural thinking through cultural trends and ideas and how people are shaped by culture, but also the psychology, both at an individual and a collective level of what makes people tick and how they think. And so, like, if you're someone who has these kind of weird interests, it's hard to find other people in a church that have similar interests or enough common ground to relate to. And I suspect that this gentleman was precocious enough and into tech and the internet and stuff like this. And this was in the early 90s, such that his church just wasn't there yet. You know, there weren't people that he could really relate to. Um, and having that institutionalized structure, it's funny I said institutionalized, but having that institutional structure of the church, having programs and areas for a ministry and outreach and ways of relating to other Christians in an institutional, organized way, I think is absolutely essential. And yeah, he doesn't have that. So like basically his whole framework here is targeted toward the isolated YouTube individual, which makes sense. Like you know, like every person who watches this series who has a relationship with Christianity even outside of a church still has all what six no seven of these pillars combined. You know, they still have a relationship with the Bible. They still, you know, so I don't know. I just really appreciate the Catholic Church and all of its failures, just having a magisterium, just having that strong institution, but both in space, but also in time. You know, going back across the saints and across you know everything that's happened for the last 2,000 years. So anyway, um, yeah. And Anselman said, "Hey Isaac, welcome." And Anselman said, "I can't comprehend how one does not get the centrality of personal relationship to God." to whatever Christian tradition one is. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Anselman. So even that's why I think like God did not create man for the mass alone, you know? There has to be more to it than just the mass, just liturgy. So I completely agree. Let's finish this out. I'll do one more video, and then if no one wants to come in, if no one says they wanna come in the comments, I'll probably just shut it down after that, after the second video. The vibes of this are so good. He's got great vibes. Let's go on. Yeah. Okay. So his next videos, yeah, each video will go after a different node in that 7 node network. And then he brings it all together. He does it's so great because he also does conversation. He does it conversationally. You'll see. It's so good.
When I was young, I viewed prayer as a way of pleading with God to give me things that I felt I needed, like courage, or for a certain unpleasant circumstance to leave me, like for bullies to leave me alone. I'd also pray, of course, for some of the sillier things that any young child will pray for, like wishing I was a robot or
He mentioned for bullies to leave him alone. Yeah, that kind of gets to my point about if the people in his church were not like him in a lot of ways and bullying him, and then you reach a point as an adult where you realize, "Oh, wow, they're all gonna stay in their same." I remember this part of Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle where, which is a ridiculous movie, but they get pulled over by a police officer, and, Kumar is like, "Yeah, you were the head of your football team, and you were the best kid in your entire high school in your town, and then after high school, we went to college, and you went nowhere." And, so and when someone who's precocious like this, who's bullied and is low status as a kid, and then they go to college and they have a huge new world opened up to them, and they have all these possibilities outside of like the strict rigid structure of religion, and also they associate all the negative experiences with that religious complex because they were bullied and they were not like those other kids. It becomes much easier to say, hey, this new world I'm presented of science and technology, and that's way better, I'm going with that. And I've got status with that because I'm really good at this internet stuff, this technology stuff.
that God would help me learn how to tie my shoes, or praying that God would help my cousin and I build a spacecraft out of wood that would help us fly to the moon. Sooner or later, though, every Christian learns that intercessory prayer doesn't always work. For example, often you'll pray for something to happen and it won't happen. Sometimes it happens later, sometimes it happens way later, and sometimes it never happens at all. Often, in my own life, I found that the likeliness of a prayer request coming true seemed to be directly proportional to the likeliness of it happening without me praying.
So the easy trap that one can get into is that um, if God answers my prayers, then I believe in God. And what I found in my new faith, and this is so freeing, it's so freeing, it's so good, is that because I believe in God, regardless of the outcomes of my prayers, regardless, it's going to be good. I trust. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be much better than I can imagine because my prayers are limited by the structure of my imagination. And as prideful and arrogant as I can think that I know what I should be praying for, that I know what's best for Neil, absolute dust, rubbish. It's rubbish. And I wouldn't I would not give up my trust in the Almighty for any prayer to be answered. And that I do not say that lightly. Like that is a rough thing to really say. Like I wouldn't, but like that's really how I think about it now. Thank God for my faith. Like thank God. Thanks be to God. Like praise the Lord. So, yeah. The key is the reversal of those things has to happen. And so in many ways, the reason I'm doing this series is I think this gentleman's deconstruction was necessary and good. I actually think that because it's necessary to break through expectations, unfulfilled expectations, to get to that point of like absolute humility. It's necessary.
To adjust for this, as I got older, I started to ask for things I was more likely to get. For example, instead of asking for God to make me a robot, give me superpowers, or send me to the moon, I'd ask for God's help on homework, help on dealing with a certain emotion, help for a friend in difficult circumstances. These are all things that I realized were likely to happen anyway, but I thought asking God for help might tip the odds in my favor. And I also feared sometimes that if I didn't ask for them, that God wouldn't let them happen, despite the fact that they seemed likely. Often I'd been burned by the situation of thinking that some good thing was definitely going to happen to me, only to be later disappointed that it didn't happen. And if I hadn't prayed, I would sometimes think it was my lack of prayer that caused it not to happen. However, eventually, even this type of intercessory prayer seemed all but obsolete to me.
You know what's interesting is I did not take my faith nearly this seriously when I was a kid. I just thought praying is what you do. I did it because my parents did it with me or I asked them. Um, I can't remember praying that often to God on my own or doing it out of my own volition. So I had a framework of practice and prayer and faith, but I didn't really have my parents didn't really emphasize like you have to believe this stuff yourself. Like you have to it was more so. And in some ways, you could think, like, how could my parents not have tried to instill a stronger faith? But in other ways, I think a better way to think about it, and this is how I feel about my parents, is that they actually trusted God. Like they really trusted God. And it's kind of like saying, we're gonna show our family, our children the way we think is best. Um, the way that is the way we live, but we're gonna trust God in figuring that out for our children in the long run. And I think realistically, that's where we are right now. I think that's the wilderness we find ourselves in. It's like any sort of institutional arrow and framework, it might help. Like it does help. I'm not saying the institutional stuff doesn't help, but the problem is we began confusing the institutions, like we began confusing democracy with God. We began confusing, societal norms with God, and those aren't those aren't the same thing. So,
Due to one creeping realization about God's nature, his omniscience. If God already knew everything before it happened and had set all of the possible events in the universe in place, there was absolutely nothing I could ask for that he didn't already know about.
yeah, so this is where Jung helped me immensely. Oh man, Jung helped me so much here because it was the realization that with prayer, you're not changing God, you are changing yourself. And where Jung helped me so much is realizing that what I think of Neil is like 5% or maybe even less of what Neil actually is. And the idea that I can top down engineer my perfect faith, the idea that I can top down pick what I care about or what I desire, it's absolute bullshit. Like I have zero control over what I actually care. It's not true, by the way. I don't have zero control over what I care about, but it's not up to me to have interest in something first. That's a grace that's presented first. It's up to me to take that, embrace it, to try to habituate it, to turn it into a practice, something that I can do. And I can, that's the rider and the elephant in Jonathan Haidt. And just beginning to understand psychology in that way, and then realizing that there's way more reason to pray than to ask God for something. Um, yeah, It's kind of like if your child is gonna argue something with the parent, is the parent really gonna be assuaged by the child's argument? No. Does the parent appreciate the child's willingness to approach them, the child's willingness to actually engage, to grow, to struggle, to strain, to wrestle with God or to wrestle with your son, so to speak. Yeah, yeah. As a parent, you love that because you could see your child begin to come into their own. You know that your child is doing things and thinking things and struggling along the way and growing in the process, and you just love it. You love seeing your child grow in that way, even if it's tough sometimes. So yeah, of course I want my daughter to pray, and of course I want my daughter to wrestle with me when she disagrees with me on something. And yeah, I wanna know her honest heart, honestly.
Further, if he was omniscient, all benevolent, and had a plan for me, then why on earth was I trying to put myself in the driver's seat?
Yeah, AA could have told you you had yourself wrong there.
What I really needed to be doing was trying to discover his will for my life.
Yeah.
If God was omniscient, then he had already given me all the tools I needed to solve whatever problem I had. It was my responsibility to find those
No, because he's seeing it as that all the problems that he has are solvable. And what was the crucifixion solved? Like, what was the solution of the crucifixion, you know? Uh, it's engineering brain. It's like every problem in my life has a solution. And that's not engineering brain is not Christian brain, unfortunately.
tools and his will for how he wanted me to use them. Not for me to tell him what tools I needed and how I thought I should use them. So, in this realization, I all but dismissed the idea of intercessory prayer. I submitted as much as was mentally and physically possible to the pursuit of discovering and executing what I felt was God's will. Prayer's sole purpose for me became discovering what God's will was and connecting with God personally and emotionally as a divine father and friend.
So I actually credit this approach that he's taking right here as a child. I credit this a lot of this with how knowledgeable and informed and creative he is with this production of this series, and I bet in large part the rest of his life. Because in that desiring to discover God's will, I have no doubt that he was in communion with God, that God was guiding him and leading him and turning him into in that process, that difficulty of communing with God, you could say, turning him into a very capable adult to the point where he was able to make this series. And when let me tell you, when this series came out, it was remarkably well, still really well produced. But in 2009, there was nothing like this on YouTube. Let me tell you.
In terms of my conception of God, this had the effect of moving the weight of my belief in God away from intercessory prayer and towards my personal experience and relationship with God. One thing I want you to notice is that this entire transformation happened completely within my Christian worldview. This is an important point because it highlights how my eventual transformation to atheism took years, and that during much of the time that it was happening, I wasn't even aware it was happening. From my perspective, I was just building up knowledge, following the truth, and learning about the world as any good student or effective servant of God should.
So, it's interesting because he doesn't I don't know if he uses the word subconscious at any point in this series, but, like, he does have an awareness after the fact that we are more than our conscious selves, our conscious intentions. Um, yeah, so the transformation aspect is really interesting, and yeah, we'll keep going.
And learning about the world as any good student or effective servant of God should. I never thought that anything I was learning or thinking would eventually lead to me doubting the existence of God. As an atheist, I later discovered an in depth study on intercessory prayer involving 1,800 patients undergoing heart surgery. The study found no positive effect on the patients who had been prayed for. Even as an atheist, the results surprised me. Despite my own personal resolution as a Christian,
Yeah, this is how I thought. Like what I believe is what I can touch, what I can see, what I can taste. Unless I put my fingers into his side, I will not believe. Yeah, this is how I thought. Like what was true was what could be independently verified, validated through the scientific method by multiple people, multiple parties. Yeah.
to use prayer solely for finding God's will, I did suspect that intercessory prayer had a positive effect, at least psychologically, just to know someone was praying for you, regardless of whether their prayers actually had some kind of metaphysical power. Surprisingly, the study found that people who knew they were being prayed for actually had more complications after surgery than those who didn't. Before I came to my realizations about God's omniscience, I was persuaded by an argument for the validity of prayer in the form of how God answers prayer. It's often said that God answers prayers in the form of yes, no, and wait. Sometimes the hardest answer to accept is wait. In their brilliant, if somewhat condescending video, GII video demonstrates using a clever example how this entire heuristic can be entirely psychological without God actually answering
Man, it just frustrates me looking at this stuff because it's like we put God in box. God gives one of three options from box. Now we have God. It's like it's not how it works. It's not how any of this works.
any prayers. To do this, they present the hypothetical in which instead of praying to God, you pray to a jug of milk. The jug of milk answers prayers in the form of yes, no, and wait. Assume that you pray to the jug of milk to give you $1,000, and they ask you to wait and see what happens. They present three different scenarios. In the first scenario, out of the blue, you get a check for $1,100 from the IRS, and they say, "See, the jug of milk answered your prayer." In the second scenario, 7 weeks later, out of the blue, you get a cost of living raise and it happens to increase your salary by $1,200. And they say, "See, the jug of milk answered your prayer. You just had to wait." In the third scenario, nothing happens for 6 months. And if you ask them why, they say, "We have to trust that the jug of milk knows best. Let's be patient."
The fastest hug a jug in the
It's clear
galaxy.
how all three of these scenarios can be applied to a prayer to God, to a prayer to a jug of milk, to a prayer to anything. Unfortunately, as comforting as the yes, no, and wait heuristic is, it can work without anything actually answering your prayers. But I want to re-emphasize that it was my own respect for God's sovereignty over my life that caused me, personally, to abandon the practice of intercessory prayer.
It's interesting he only talks about one form of prayer. I don't know if he talks about other, I think there are 4 form I really should know the answer to this. You got gratitude. He doesn't really talk about gratitude practice. I think that's where AA has a leg up because, it starts with gratitude and it starts with humility before God, and then it works from there. And rather than the God of the vending machine, so to speak. Um, yeah, so I dropped the link in case anyone wants to come in. I think we're almost done. Um, Yeah, I thought this was a really good point from Ben Berg. True human freedom cannot exist if a divine immutable script already exists. One question that I have is like, what does God know and when does he know it? And on one hand, you could think like God always knows everything and Jesus always knew everything. It's like, I'm not so sure God works that way. I think that's an assumption that we make about God. I'm not willing to put God even into that box. I think Jesus had faith in the Father. I think Father had faith in the Son, the Holy Spirit, and had faith in all of them have faith in each other. And so, what does it mean to have faith if you don't fully know? I don't know. That's a great question. You know. But if anyone wants to come in, I'm happy to discuss. But otherwise, we're just about done, and I think it's a good place to pause. Yeah. So the next one, morality. And this is going to be particularly interesting. And I think it's going to be interesting because I'm curious to see. And again, I don't remember this. It's been 16 years now. So more than that, 17 years, I think. I'm going to be curious to see how, whatchamacallit, oh, I see someone entered. But I'm going to be curious to see how morality is treated by him, given that everything that's been deconstructed over the past 17 years. So, welcome, Robin.
Hey, you're gonna have to. I don't know if there's lag or if I just missed some of what you said, but what? How can I enter this conversation with some benefit to the?
Well, I just finished the video on prayer, and that's where I'm
Yeah,
gonna stop. Yeah, on his deconstruction of prayer, and really, it wasn't prayer so much as intercessory prayer.
I get the sense that you have some personal affection for this process, like or resonance, something like that. And I suppose I do too. Where does it land with you? Are you frustrated by it? Like the title was that it was necessary, I think, right? Isn't that part of what you said?
The process of going back to consider how I thought about this series when it first came out. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, maybe I'm just misreading the title. I thought that you were implying that the deconstruction itself was necessary.
I think so. Yes, I think that's accurate. Um, because obviously the God of a wishing well is not an adequate or accurate reflection of God. So, yeah. Or my faith as it was, let's say, as a 15-year-old was insufficient edifice or structure of how to contend with the world.
So it may be presumptuous for me to assume that these problems. Um, what gave you the intuition to come to uh, different conclusions than this guy? Like I don't want to ridicule this guy because like he put a fair amount of thought into this. But from my current perspective, and I don't know how old the guy was. I have no idea where he's at now, like how long ago this came out, but it seems almost silly. Partly
No,
because it's so propositional and rational. It's like, oh, dude, like, don't you have any relationships with real people that just make this? I don't know. Like, it. How did you get to where you're at, where you can look at this and recognize so easily? And of course, there's the bias of like, um, it's hard to remember what it was like not to understand something. So I don't know actually how long ago. For instance, my understanding of God has certainly changed since I started interacting with people in this corner. And now we're coming up on almost what, like 5 years for me that this has been going on. So I remember in a certain sense like needing Paul's validation that that whatever crisis I was going through was like normal. um so I don't know. I mean, I've gone through waves of some sort of deconstruction, but boy, like from the jump, I just never thought of God as like the genie in the bottle or something that could be proven right or wrong. It was just either there is such thing as love or there's not. And if there is such thing as God, he's love. So kind of done.
No, but honestly, that's a way healthier starting point. Yeah, and in the very first episode, where deconstructing my deconstruction one, I mentioned that I always had a strong relationship with my father, and because of that, I think I never fully deconstructed. You know, because I could deconstruct any sort of like logical imperfection that I perceived in the church as a 15-year-old or shortly thereafter, but I couldn't deconstruct love because I had loving parents. You know, so I was very fortunate in that, and yeah, and in no small part, I'm sure that's why I have faith today. So, yeah. I no, I think that's great. I think you're right. Yeah.
Our estuary group out here in whatever you would call it, Northwest Washington State, met last night. We talked a little bit about the this. Well, so there were some pitches having to do with minimum viable institution, and then this sort of uh, weaponization of empathy, and there was a thread between those two because we care about other people. And what is I don't know who's the person who's responsible for the quote of like both heaven and hell are other people. Like I'm totally butchering it, but like the thing that we want and need most, like on a biological, physiological level, is real deep relationship with other people. Like we long for it. And yet it is it presents the most liability because um it's not dependent on us. Like we're explicitly um uh becoming vulnerable, expressing need, all those different kinds of things. And so the way that the reason why I think that our conversation last night is relevant to what you're talking about today is because um the I, I am concerned that I am wired so much differently than the people who go through this kind of deconstruction or who are baited into making deep personal sacrifice, including like engaging in well, whatever, getting recruited for uh, into battles that are just nowhere in any way related to their well-being, whether that's people engaging in political unrest or just any of the things that like would take them away from caring for their own children, engaging with their own real life relationships. And so part of our conversation was this agony that we feel when we care about people in general, but sometimes specific people, and we have no idea how to make contact with them, like how to introduce them to a worldview that is able to trust something like a like uh existential foundation of love. Like how do you rest on the rock
Yeah.
when
It's
when
like
you when you yeah.
how do with everything going on in the world, like, how do you reach the conclusion that you are in the right place at the right time with the opportunity to do the right thing? That's how I think of it. It's like because
Or even just
I
let go of
go
that
ahead.
being your duty whatsoever. Like how can you just not be responsible for things that aren't your responsibility and on any level understand the few things that are your responsibility? Like for one, there's this um sense that humility would prevent me from telling somebody exactly where that line should be drawn. And in our meeting last night, the people who were new, the person who was new, you could see him like you could see him relax when he realized that this was an environment where we didn't tell each other what they were supposed to think. And and yet, like it's important that in almost a confessional way that I admit that I have a stand. I'm taking a stand. This is where I stand. I do have beliefs and feelings uh and they're not entirely rational or voluntary. It's just that's that's the way it is for me. So here's my question, if I can formulate a question for you. When you run into somebody that you care about, either in an abstract way because they're just a human being, or it's somebody in your family or your sphere of influence, and and they're just wired so much differently than you that you don't know how to present them evidence that would signal uh, what I consider a healthier worldview, where they can feel safe and at ease, um, and stop running from stuff that isn't trying to get them, and maybe put up some boundaries where things very much are trying to get them.
I only have one answer, and it's not even an answer. Um, it's the road to Emmaus.
Okay,
That's the
break that.
answer.
What's that? The
The after it's one of the stories, one of the very few stories of after Jesus's resurrection,
Where he walks and
where
he explains the gospel to the two guys that don't even see him until he's breaking bread with them. Is that it?
yeah. So
Okay.
the key there's some key aspects of that though. One is that the two guys are walking in the wrong direction. They're walking away from Jerusalem, or yeah, I think they're walking away from Jerusalem, and all Jesus does is get them to talk. He's like, "Oh, where are you guys going? What happened?" And they're like, "Didn't you hear? We thought this guy was like the salvation of the world, and then he's just dead, and it's done." And Jesus just makes them talk. That's it, you know. And it's like, because it's not really up to us to change other people. Like it is up to us to like love other people. But the way that Jesus does that is the road to Emmaus, which is just to be with them, like meet them where they are. Because in some ways, like when you're encountering someone like that who or thinks differently in any aspect, what you're basically doing is if you're encountering someone in a non-oppositional way, what you're basically doing is putting faith in something that's beyond both of you, that whoever's worldview is correct will come out on top. It's almost like subordinating your own propositional, and probably more than propositional, but it's subordinating what you yourself think is right, either for the two of you or for that person. You're subordinating that um, to something that's beyond your capacity
Right,
or will.
to
And
the authority of truth, goodness, and beauty. Right.
yeah, yeah. And so like that's what I mean by, and I think I said this earlier in the stream of like the absolute humility of, you know, I'll probably be changed by that person, but it's like, you know, if your faith is, if you have faith in like your church more than faith in God, that's a problem. If you have faith in democracy more than that overarching principle, that's a problem. If it, and that's really scary to people because, you know, what if their mind is changed and what if they are naked in the wilderness? And that was all the way at the beginning of, yeah. So, but once you experience that once, which I did because I did deconstruct, then it's like, oh, okay. I don't know. It becomes less worrisome subsequently in the future. It's not like I'm not afraid of like talking to strangers. Like I'm totally for other reasons, usually like physical violence reasons. But
Where
you
do
know,
you see your where do you see our time in the grand narrative of um, Jesus' reign? Like, in theory, he's been on the throne. I shouldn't say in theory. According to the story, he's been on the throne now for a long time. Um, and um, it looks like for maybe a couple hundred years, the environment was such, and I have opinions about what the primary context is that sort of allowed it to be so, but like the people really got it. They were really walking the walk. But it didn't take long for um, the culture and the people of the new way to be integrated into existing power structures, and no longer were they the the set apart, the minority, the persecuted. They were now having to wrestle with what it meant for them to wield power, and uh and that just turned into a complete dumpster fire for thousands of years. Well, maybe not plural, but here we are. You, I'm sure, have a different culture of worship than I do. You could throw a rock out your window and hit a church that does. And yet I am confident that you, um, at very least, don't assume within yourself the ability to decide which among the people who are earnestly trying to connect with God, and even some like earnestly through uh, a variety of different strategies, including the Bible, including some of the culture that has been preserved over the last 2,000 years. Like some of those, I'm certain, even in churches that I think that their culture and tradition is totally jacked up, some of those people God calls his own. And so what what then, how does that, how do you deal with being part of that larger body given the evidence that we have that it it seems like only in the deconstruction is the unity between those different groups recognized?
Yeah, it's like only in the darkness that we all recognize the light.
Like the foxhole or whatever,
Yeah,
we're like, we're brothers here. Okay, but like,
yeah.
so what is going on? Like in the grand narrative, what do you think is happening here?
Yeah, I go back to the David and Saul analogy. It's very weird because at the same time that people are very divided, that you could say the kingdom is very divided, Christianity as a whole seems more connected and unified. I'm not saying we don't have our debates or our arguments, but maybe, and this is the cynic in me, maybe it's the only reason Christianity is more connected, less divided, is because it doesn't have the power to like put its enemies to death that it had 500 years ago. I'm a little bit less cynical than that. I I think I think most people who are lukewarm Christians have walked away or deconstructed at this point. It's gotten to the point where, especially within Roman Catholicism, I suspect that within Protestantism, it's much the same way. Orthodoxy is probably lagging a little bit behind here, but that most people who were lukewarm in their faith have since left the church. Um, and so
I wanna
yeah, go
pick
ahead.
apart at what you're calling lukewarm,
So
because
so let's say it was
let me just give an
oh,
example
okay.
so you know what I'm
Mhm.
asking here. In my experience with Protestantism, which is where I finally found people who were authentically striving for a relationship with God, but I think that could have happened within any congregation. It was just where I finally was approached by people that were like, "No, we're doing this." I was like, "Dang, I'm in," right? But the problem is the most zealous among them have actually done the most damage. And so I don't, whether you call it zeal or what was the term you used? Um,
Zeal is a good word. Yeah.
okay. Well, regardless, whatever that is, the idea that
Mhm.
somebody would be um, not lukewarm, right?
Mhm.
That they would care, they would think it matters, that somehow that this were like an answer to the meaning crisis, whatever.
Yeah.
But my concern is that um I don't know that this is true. I'm just going to kind of say it the way that it's coming to me. That the deconstruction that sort of proves the silliness of the propositions and the dogmas of the different um church traditions that create the distinction between them is uh is in a sense an enemy to love God, love your neighbor.
Hmm.
Like I think a majority of people who are zealous and are not lukewarm are re-
What are they
are
zealous
connecting with
about, though?
something exactly.
That's it.
And that's what I'm asking.
Mhm.
That's the probe that I'm wanting to stick into your, like, they're lukewarm.
Yeah.
Well, in so many cases, I have had to make I've had to courageously um, say I don't believe what somebody who is in a position of authority within my church tradition believes, at
Mhm.
risk of my standing within the fellowship. And that's tragic, but it's necessary.
Mhm.
And I don't think that the existing institutions are mature enough to engage in that in a way that's not harmful. It, I don't think that um, that it's bad to engage in it. I actually think it's very healthy. It's like arguing with your spouse and your kids. Some arguments are worth having, and there are ways to have them that are top down, authoritarian, my way or the highway, that allow for you to be way wrong and still the gatekeeper of that institution. In a certain sense,
Yeah.
it's the strategy itself that proves you're wrong. Like, I almost don't care what stand you're taking. It's the my way or the highway that, like, that is the problem. I the, somebody would then be like, "Well, what are you, a universalist or something like that?" And I'm like, "I don't think so." Um, but I do think that that the who God is and the how we're supposed to treat each other still has to be. It's why estuary is so attractive to so many people, because they're not being forced to say they believe stuff they don't believe, even if eventually they come around to it and they're like, no,
Mhm.
now that I see what you're saying, it
Mhm.
makes sense. Can you hear all my background noise?
No, just you, so
Oh
you're good.
gosh, I'm having to, like, yell.
Now you're coming in loud and clear. You're good. Mhm. So when I was 5 years old, this is how I think of TLC actually. When I was 5 years old and I would play soccer, any 5-year-old kids, maybe I'm answering your question in terms of where we are in our Christianity. It's probably we're about 5. Because 5 years old, you're playing soccer. What happens
Oh,
is the ball is like somewhere on the field, and like 22, or I guess maybe 21 of the 24 kid, or 20, sorry, 19 of the 22 kids on the field are all around the ball, all kicking it. They're like, no, 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 give me the ball, give me the ball. No, they're all kicking the ball, and they're clustered around. And we had this one soccer player, this one really smart kid, and his father was a smart coach, and he would kind of stand maybe about 5 meters outside of the giant cluster around the ball, and about 10 feet or so. And you'd have the two goalies; they were there, they're sitting in goal, and the guy who's standing outside, he would just like wait for the Lord. Well, he'd wait for the ball, and he would just like kind of sit there and wait because he knew at some point someone would kick in such a way that the ball would pop out of the cluster. But as long as the ball was in the cluster with like the mosh pit, so to speak, like you couldn't do anything, but like you could just wait, and then eventually the ball pops out. And so like that's where I think we are right now. We're in a waiting period, and during a waiting period, our best bet is to like prepare. And so what it means to prepare is like, are our relationships strong? Check. Do we know how to welcome new people when they see the wisdom of what we're doing? Check. Got it. Um, can we be there for them and welcome them in love? And as they come out of the mosh pit, like flailing, not knowing what the heck is going on. Um, can we welcome them and be patient as they're stumbling around? It's like check. Um, yeah. So I don't know what else to do other than kind of hang around the edge and just wait and be patient and, like, just I think the most important thing that we can do, and it's the road to Emmaus again, it's kinda like letting people know that we exist, and if there's a curiosity beyond their current frame of reference, then we're there. But until something presents itself to that person like a glint in the night sky, there's nothing that I can do to really, show the person differently than what they're thinking. Yeah, it's not a thing. That at least that I found. If anyone finds, like, the mind control secret, let me know. I'd love it, but I haven't found it.
What do you mean by that? The mind control secret. What would you do with the what is it? What would you do with it?
Well, Grim Grizz, always talks about, that we are, having saving throws against mind control, and the mind control
Okay.
is like the machine. It's like Paul Kingsnorth, the machine, or what the advertisements want you to buy, or what these are the right, anyway, um, I I d I don't think there's anything that's been really mind control. I think people just naturally gravitate toward what they individually want. And the last thing that we each think of is like letting go of the things that we want. That's the last thing that anyone wants to, like, if I go up to a stranger and say, like, the key to your happiness is letting go of everything that you want. And but then so that would be like the Buddhist move, right? But then there's a move beyond that, which is like, no, no, no. There's other things that you'll be told or granted to you that can't come from anyone else but your Father that's in heaven. But like, you can have that conversation with someone because it's not even the right time to do that. Like, it's not the right time to do that
I've
until the
found a way
person.
completely around that anyway.
Okay.
Uh, and that's just to want what God wants. Like, that's okay. You can go hard at that. It's weird because you kind of can't go hard at it.
But what
Going
does
hard at
God want?
gentleness and patience and trustworthiness and faith, like loving mercy, walking humbly, uh, and justly. Like that's that's what that's what I want to live in, is a world full of those people. And the only way to get that is for people to, like, there's the potluck analogy. If you're the only one who brought like a real substantial heart invested dish to the potluck, kind of sucks. And there's this sense that, like, I'm alone and there's scarcity. But if everybody brings that, but it's actually still not very much food, you're still just fired up. You're like, you know what? We brought our best. Like, even if we went without for a long time, this group is solid. Like, we're going to make it.
That's a yeah, universal basic institution, the potluck. It's good.
Could be. One of the, one of the questions that pesters me is this idea of where do people end up settling in when the current institutional structure crumbles. And maybe it won't happen fast. um Maybe somehow, like, it's kind of like looking at the government and like, I'm sorry, reform can't happen from within that. It's so far past. Like, I don't know what that means. I don't want that to sound like as tragic as it does. Like, oh my gosh, are you saying that it's over already? um I don't know. I don't, in a weird way, I'm like, what do you mean over? Like, it was a mess from the jump. But, um, also all these things that I need, uh, depend on these structures. Like, groceries at the grocery store, gas at the gas station, that doesn't happen all by itself. And so the same thing is true within the minimum viable institution of culture. So if everybody realizes that their church has been LARPing and really actually misaligned for 1,000 years, uh, uh, well, then where do you go from there? You're not going to make it up yourself. That's ridiculous. Like,
Well, the Bible seems to be pretty endurable, so enduring. Um, yeah,
yeah, but
I think it'll be around.
have you ever been part of a house church?
No.
It's beautiful, but it's not what it's not it's like it's not community. It's almost like giving up. It's like I homeschool my kids, and people have a really good argument that I've just that I'm that I've run instead of tried to participate in fixing the institution. And I'm like, God, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I gave up. I pulled out. I'm not going to go back into the city. Um, but it does mean that now the city is just left to consume itself. So I don't know how I don't know any way around that with the church.
Mhm.
Here are these institutional structures. I don't know how much of them were built on good foundation. You know, there's that passage where it talks about many people will build on the foundation of Christ with different materials. Some of them find what is it like precious stones and the like, and it's going to be revealed for its value. Um, and the foundation of the Bible is still. It's amazing that some of the things are in there because they are the words that will that will judge the churches themselves. Oh my God, you could have edited that out, but you left it in, you morons. But it's great. I mean, so I just don't know where people end up. Standing on the word, great. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where they'll end up. But what of the debris, what of the culture and the structure that brings so much comfort will be left? What of
I
the
think there'll be a
unity?
lot left. I think there will be a lot left. Yeah, I don't know what the world's gonna look like 40, 50 years from now. I think it will take a full generation, uh, to really see, but I have a feeling that I have a feeling the world will look very different in 40 or 50 years, but I think the world 50 years after that compared to so the world of 50 years from now compared to the world of 100 years from now, I don't think it's gonna look that much different. Um, I have a feeling technological progress we're coming and it's not immediate, but we're gonna come to kind of a slow but steady, stop on that in kind of a new plateau, and then it'll be up to the sociological structures to figure out and usually it takes, like it took more than 250 years from the Protestant Reformation to get the creation of the United States. And the United States did not get it right in the first attempt, the Articles of Confederation. And, these things take a lot of time to figure out how you go from a universal technology like the printing press to everyone learning to read, how you go from that to like a sociological body that can actually deal with that. And it might take more than 40 or 50 years, I don't know. But I think it's gonna take some time before we have stable sociological bodies. And the other thing is like, to some extent, the sociological the bodies like a country, a nation, a country, they're never like stable, you know, like we had so many rebellions in the early United States. We had huge riots after the murder of Martin Luther King. We yeah, I mean, I don't know. We have this expectation of like stability in some way, and I think the main sociological change that has to happen is the care has to be the proper order of loves, and that's something that's JD Vance has talked about. But I don't see any other way how it could be any other way of like in order for families to sustain themselves across generations, the family needs to come before the nation needs to come before. Yeah. I don't
Do
see.
you
Yeah.
have what evidence, and evidence sounds wrong because it sounds like I'm aiming at some propositional thought process.
Mhm,
It seems to me, and I'm old enough to have a 33-year-old daughter,
mm.
and it's so encouraging talking to her in a lot of ways about like her own understanding of herself. Like she's just so much more mature and put together than I was at her age. I'd learned some tougher lessons because I made mistakes early on in life that she waited until she was older to make. But regardless, um, the idea that um, that family, specifically family and marriage, are something worth doing is not popular, and it doesn't seem to be getting more popular. How do you contend with that? Like, because the idea of functional institutions in 50 years seems silly if people can't even make the level of compromise to have a marriage.
It's, Matthew 5:5,
Okay.
which
What's
is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So there's some subset of people right now, alive right now, that have the requisite wisdom, sociological structures that are going to persist past their progeny, you know? So, I don't know who it is. I don't know the right set of,
those who
but it's
live
like
according to the Sermon on the Mount will endure.
no, it's well, that word meek is very interesting because the word meek is like humble in action and spirit. So let's say a partnership where both partners are humble toward each other and say, absolutely, I'm there for you. I humble myself before you, you know. Um, in that sort of marriage, yeah, that sort of marriage is going to sustain because no matter what happens, like I'm there for you, you know. And if there's a meek, also in the Sermon on the Mount's on my mind because I've got to teach it to high school kids in just a little bit, actually. Um, but also in the Sermon on the Mount, it's blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God, and that's the lowering oneself in service gives you faith. I mean, they're mutually compatible. So yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that there are going to be patterns and institutions of behavior that persist indefinitely. And honestly, it's not a secret what those things are. Like they're the same things that existed 1,000 years ago, and it's people that are humbly working together in love, and and it's just a matter of like what containers those are in, what church. I don't know that I can't say, but like that's
I
what's going to
really
persist.
appreciate that framing because it reminds me that in the same way that people that we were sort of feeling a sense of loss and mourning for people baited into these political uh, worldviews that make things seem important that are just not within their sphere of influence. You're reminding me that when I think about the macro socioeconomic and cultural trends, that those are in that domain as well. Like if what we do is we consider the things that we can influence and we invest in those and we trust in uh the I guess presupposition, whatever it is, that when we operate according to um, the way that we know is in accordance with that Sermon on the Mount, with the acting justly, loving mercy, walking humbly. Like when we do that, it kind of doesn't matter if the world falls down around us. Like, and in a certain sense, that sounds prideful because like I'm putting me in that group of uh, the
But it
righteous, but
yeah, I mean, it's kinda like saying Like, eh, do am I angry at God for killing 90% of Europe during the bubonic plague, you know?
Are you? Uh, Such an interesting thing, the idea of communicating anger toward God. It seems so inappropriate, and yet, uh, like, read the Psalms. Uh, it usually only takes a paragraph to get turned around, but I don't, yeah. How long, oh Lord, how long? How long should I wait, Neil? Hmm. I heard a sound in the background. I hope you didn't have to drop everything and run to some catastrophe. God, I'm grateful for times like this that we can just recognize your presence. Um, there are so many catastrophes. Um, they could fall on us in our household any minute. Um, I don't have any reason to think that Neil's involved in something tragic right now, but God, I know that.
No, I'm good, I'm
Oh,
back.
there you are. Great. Okay, good. I was
But
just praying.
I do have to go.
Awesome. Cool. I
Yep.
gotta go too. Thanks for your time, and it's always encouraging to be able to share thoughts about these things because,
Mhm.
yeah, we wouldn't have this corner if there were more of us in real life.
Yeah, no problem, Robin. It was great getting to know you. 'Cause were you at Midwestuary?
No,
No, okay.
no.
'Cause I've
I
seen you around, I just forget
yeah,
where
I
I've seen
float
you.
in and out of things occasionally.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, hope to catch you in the future, but bye, everybody.